Fort Lamay. Home. Though I had been far from it before, I never dreamed I would be quite so far as I found myself then. You see, my journey began 5,000 years before my adventure on Darwin IV. In the year 1920 AD, on the planet Earth, my wife Isabel and I had just welcomed our daughter Claire into the world. Our humble home was nestled along the shore of Houghton Lake in Michigan, and we enjoyed a life of deciduous bliss when I was not on assignment. The construction firm of my employ utilized me as a kind of specialized project manager that was trusted to oversee the most difficult tasks. This meant that the work I was given was often dangerous to a degree, but I was afforded more time at home as a trade-off. Isabel and I delighted in the company of our newly born child, and we were thrilled to make our home a comfortable place for our budding family. One day, when I had just returned from a deer hunt, a messenger arrived to alert me of my having been placed on a new assignment in Africa. I had always dreamed of making the journey to Africa, and I found the idea of working in the land of the fabled safari to be nothing short of romantic. Isabel, on the other hand, loathed the idea of me leaving our young family. Isabel was not only worried for my safety in a land reported to be home to most savage beasts, but she also feared that Claire would suffer from a lack of attachment to her father at her young and impressionable age. In the end, we agreed that I would go. The one condition of my going being that upon my return I would seek employment locally and never again find myself so far away from my family. My heart was gripped equally by adventure and domestication. I kissed the women I loved most dear and promised to return to them safely and forever. The next morning I boarded the train that heralded me along on my seemingly endless journey to Africa. I was to oversee the construction of a hospital at Fort Lamay, a burgeoning trade city that had grown to need the baser fineries of civilized life. As I journeyed across the great ocean, I took it upon myself to research and familiarize myself with the region, as well as the job that was expected of me. I became most enthralled by not one but two translated reports of local laborers who claimed that a demon spirit stalked the grounds of the hospital construction. Adding some credence to their claims was the confirmation of over 20 men who had simply gone missing from the construction site. I made a mental note to deal with these mysteries promptly upon arrival. My employers were kind enough to make sure that my journey to Fort Lamay was one of a most scenic nature, and I found myself swept up in the majesty of the myriad of animal life and terrains that comprise the various African landscapes. I was most impressed with a hippopotamus, a creature whose sheer immensity stood for my utter underestimation of the vastness of Africa. My arrival at the fort was, as per my instruction, lacking in frivolity. I familiarized myself with the translators and second officers my company had provided, so that I could directly address the business of the demon that had so terrorized my workforce. My second-in-command, a German man by the name of Meisel, informed me that there had been more reported disappearances during my travels, and that the total number of men lost now numbered in the 60s. Many interviews I conducted resulted in frightful men telling me of a great devil that was half man and half gorilla stealing the souls of men and dragging their bodies down to a frightful pit of flame not unlike hell itself. I am a scientific man who believes in practical things, so I continued with the interviews until the likenesses present within them revealed a more likely culprit. A lion, or lions, of an unusual size had been seen by many of the workers on those nights in which the men had gone missing. Upon learning that such creatures were of a size to carry off a fully grown man, I felt there to be sufficient proof that my demon was more likely a ferocious feline. My interviews ultimately pointed to a man who had watched the offending animals enter the work site and carry off one of the missing men personally. He had been so frightened by the demons that it took a considerable amount of coaxing to retrieve the information from him. Armed with this knowledge, I asked Meisel to ready a weapon of sufficient strength and acquire a livestock animal to entice the offending brutes. I had resolved to make my working camp safe that very night. Night descended upon Lamay, and I was afforded a brief moment to revel in the African twilight as the haunting and unique symphony of nature played a requiem for the day's passing. Meisel, who had accompanied me on my hunt, was quick to keep me focused as he informed me of the terrible power these African lions possessed. He insisted they were unlike anything I had hunted before, and I wondered if he even knew that I had not even laid eyes on such a creature before, let alone hunted anything of its size. We sat upon the sturdy branch of a mid-sized tree and watched the zebra we set as bait as it milled in the clearing. The custom Mauer rifle that Meisel had offered me was as handsome a firearm as any I had seen, and I was made duly certain of its effectiveness as I had been shown the rhinoceros hide the weapon was responsible for. I heard a rumble like muffled thunder, and I saw mesmerizing luminescent eyes approach the unsuspecting zebra from a thicket of protection. Meisel shook feverishly behind me as I trained the Mauer on the lion. The creature was far more immense than I had expected, and as it slowly inched itself from behind its protective thicket, my respect for the animal deepened. I had never seen the raw musculature that the lion possessed on any other animal. The lion approached its kill with its flank presented to me, and I felt Meisel nervously nudging me to take the shot. I whispered, "The eyes," and the beast snapped its head toward our tree so that its gaze was directly level with mine. In those eyes, I saw the seed of evil, not instinct. I thumbed the hammer, took the shot, and the beast fell dead on the spot. As Meisel produced a whoop of triumph, a horrendous and opposite sound was produced at the other end of camp. The screams of a man in pain ripped through the night air. I wasted no time in dropping from the tree and making haste toward the camp. Near the workmen's tent, a circle of men were attempting to beat a second enormous beast with the thorny branches of a local shrub. The lion, covered in blood, gripped a poor man in its mouth. The man hung by the waist and was eviscerated further by each of the thrashing and jerking motions of the lion as it evaded the swatting of the men. The worker's screams became tangled with the sounds of his ripping flesh, and the scene may well have been projected from hell itself. I charged through the men, being torn by the bush they used to defend themselves, and came within 5 feet of the raging brute. On meeting my eyes, the lion dropped the man and produced a most horrible roar from deep within its throat. Here, too, were the eyes of evil. The Mauer issued another true shot, and the lion collapsed in a pool of blood. I immediately loaded the weapon again and shot the workman square in the skull. His screams ceased immediately. He would suffer no longer. My second, Meisel, and the rest of the men at Fort Lamay were overjoyed at my triumph over the horrific beasts. I allowed a day or two of celebration, for it is a most enlivening thing for a physical labor force to cast aside their work and make merry. During the frivolities, I busied myself with composing a schedule of work with aims to complete the hospital in less than a year. After sufficient celebration, the work resumed with a fervent passion, and I reported regularly to Isabel and my employers of dedication showcased by the men in my employ. A month ahead of schedule, I was most pleased to speak at the ribbon-cutting ceremony which signified the completion of the hospital. As a part of the ceremony, Meisel presented me with the hides of the 2 monsters I had slain. He made a particular flourish in the presentation of the gift, adding that my actions were brave, and no man had gone missing from the work site since my 2 shots, and only 2 shots had taken their prize. I, not being much for fanfare, gladly accepted the gifts and stated that I should very much like to see the skins of the demons ornamenting my hearth at home. In all the year I had spent in Africa, not one sight or sound was enough to send Claire and Isabel from my mind. I gladly said a silent farewell to the country of legend as I stood upon the train platform and awaited the car that would send me on my way home. A gentleman approached me as I waited and congratulated me on my fine accomplishments at Fort Lamay. I observed that the man must have just arrived in Africa, as his clothes were cleaner than they ought to be, and he bore no signs of perspiration. He explained that he had been appointed by my employer to appropriate me to another assignment. I quickly and politely refused the man and chose the opportunity to make he and my employer know of my intent to find other employment. He then said the words that vex me to this day. "I knew you'd say that," followed quickly by, "Terribly sorry about this." I fell into unconsciousness, and indeed, a new adventure.